Module 5, Slide 2. It is time for parents to teach young people early on that in diversity there is beauty and there is strength. Maya Angelou, writer, poet, civil rights activist. Module 5, Slide 3. Module 5, Objectives. Upon completion of this module, you'll be able to list and describe the main principles of inclusive education. Explain the connection between inclusive education and human rights. Name several benefits of inclusive education for all students. Give at least 2 examples of inclusive education that can be implemented in your school and classroom. Module 5, Slide 4. Mrs. Bandera's story. As you listen to Mrs. Bandera's story, think about how you would feel and what you would do in her place.
Mrs. Bandera is a 6th grade math teacher at Instituto Maria Canales Elementary School in Mexico. As a new teacher, she was already feeling overwhelmed with her teaching load, and especially with trying to prepare her students to take the national examinations at the end of the term. Then one day, the principal told her that she would be getting a new student in her class. Maria, explained Ms. Flores, has special needs. But my class is already overcrowded, objected Mrs. Bandera, and many of my students have problems. Pedro, for example, is dyslexic, and Juanita has ADHD. She can't sit still for 1 minute. Eduardo seems to be depressed most of the time. Some days he just stares into space. Yes, I know, acknowledged Ms. Flores, and you're doing a wonderful job. But Maria has a physical condition that requires special attention and accommodation, and I'm here to help. Mrs. Bandera listened cautiously as the principal continued. As you know, our new school policy calls for including all students, even those with serious disabilities, into regular classrooms for as long as possible each day. Before this, students with disabilities, like Maria's, were placed in special schools or programs with teachers and health professionals trained to help them learn, but they were mostly kept isolated from the rest of the students. Sadly, some of them did not go to school at all or were placed in institutions. Our new inclusive education policy ensures that they get the education they need to fulfill their potential. That's very idealistic, said Mrs. Bandera. But in reality, we teachers just cannot cope. No, not by yourselves, replied Miss Flores. First of all, at the end of this term, before Maria joins your class, we'll be giving all teachers an intensive training program on the principles and practices of inclusive education, on how to organize your class to serve students with diverse needs. Then we'll form a partnership with Maria's current special needs teacher and our school nurse to make a plan just for Maria. I'm afraid that the other students will make fun of her. If that happens, it will have to stop immediately. Setting the ground rules for the classroom social environment is very important, and it's one of the topics covered in the training. In addition, we have found that including disabled students in regular classrooms actually improves understanding of what we mean by ability and builds strong relationships. Don't worry, you'll see what I mean.
Module 5, Slide 5. What is inclusion? Inclusion is the fundamental principle and practice of welcoming and respecting all members of a social group, ensuring their equal rights, and committing to an environment in which every person is valued, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, economic situation, or level of mental or physical ability. Applied to education, inclusion, or inclusivity, is based on the premise that all students can and should be full participants in their classrooms, schools, and communities. In inclusive classrooms, students with disabilities participate alongside their differently abled peers in the same age group. Girls and boys are treated equally and treat each other with respect. Students of different races, ethnic groups, abilities, and economic classes all feel welcomed and supported. Students who are new to the school environment, who are learning the language of instruction, or who may have gaps in their learning history, are fully welcomed and supported by both their teachers and their peers. Inclusion means the practice of making all students feel and be included, but it is often used specifically to refer to including students with special needs. That is, students with specific physical, cognitive, academic, social, or emotional challenges, many of whom would have been excluded from regular classrooms or sent to special schools prior to the adoption of inclusive education policies. Although in practice, inclusive education presents many of its own challenges, the driving principle of successful programs is that both students and teachers feel welcomed and supported, and that teachers can rely on having access to specialized expertise when they need it. Module 5, Slide 6. Is inclusion only about students with disabilities? The simple answer is no. The application of the principles of inclusion encompass any and all of the reasons students in a particular context may have been excluded from getting a quality education. A child may, for example, not be diagnosed as intellectually, emotionally, or physically impaired, but may still have characteristics or life experiences that create the need for specialized support. She or he may be considered exceptionally gifted or talented, may have a genetic condition that makes her look different, or may have been severely traumatized by witnessing or experiencing the horrors of war. It is also important to remember that not all individual characteristics that require specialized support are visible. They may manifest themselves in different ways. But it is also true that some individual students need more attention and support from their teachers than others. The inclusive classroom, however, is one that acknowledges individuality, provides extra support to students who need it most, and creates a climate in which all students have space to grow. That said, implementing inclusive education requires additional resources and teacher support, some of which will be discussed later in this module. It cannot usually be accomplished all at once. However, the aim in both theory and practice is to enable teachers to establish a learning environment based on acceptance and belonging for all students, gain access to support services for students who need them, and engage parents and communities in helping all children reach their full potential. Module 5, Slide 7. What do the scientists say? Scientists tell us that all modern humans are members of the same species, Homo sapiens, and that except for gender, The differences among us are shaped by adaptation to our natural environment and by culture. But is discrimination against others that appear to be different something that is in our nature, or is it something we learn to do as we grow and become socialized into one group or another? As they do on so many other fundamental questions about human behavior, scientists disagree. Some say that we are born free of discrimination, that it is a learned set of attitudes and behaviors. Others say that fear of others who are different is ingrained in our brain, as it is in those of other primates, to protect ourselves. When we see someone who appears to be very different, a response is immediately triggered in our brains that causes us to be fearful and fight or run away. This is sometimes called fight or flight, an urge which generally fades once the rational areas of our brains convince us that there is no danger. Whichever view is correct, nature or nurture, what matters is that the more we are around people who are not familiar, different in appearance, beliefs, language, or in any way, the less we see them as different, and the more we come to see how much we are alike. Because as young children grow and become socialized into family, community, and school groups, and because the years from birth to age 5 are crucial for developing healthy social and emotional outcomes, the younger children have opportunities to build friendships and establish bonds within diverse groups, the more likely it is that they will naturally become empathetic and socially aware of people who are different from themselves, easily accept them on equal terms, and become more resilient and open to social change. Module 5, Slide 8. 6 Key Principles of Inclusion. 1. Equal access, reducing or eliminating barriers to participation, for example, physical barriers by providing handicapped access to classrooms, libraries, and laboratories. 2. Normalization. This involves changing mindsets to accept and respect people with disabilities or other characteristics which make them different. 3. Sensitivity to learners' individual strengths and challenges. This involves making space in the curriculum for getting to know your students as human beings with individual identities, histories, and personalities. 4. Reflective practice. This refers to a multifaceted approach to teaching and learning that invites teachers, either as individuals or as a group, to meet and reflect on how something was taught and how it could be changed or improved to reach all learners using, for example, continuous assessment tools. 5. Differentiated instruction. This is exactly what the term says, finding ways to adapt teaching and learning to meet the different needs of diverse learners. 6. Community and collaboration. This simply means that inclusive education works best when all the people in a child's life collaborate: her parents, her siblings, her extended family, and other community members, as well as her medical support team, her general classroom teachers, special needs teachers, and tutors, all collaborate in support of her inclusion into the classroom and community. Module 5, Slide 9. Programs and tools that enable inclusive education. Since legal frameworks and commitments to inclusive education have been embraced by school systems around the world, there are a number of programs, methods, and tools recognized as effective enablers. Among these are early intervention and childhood programs in which children ages 1 to 5 can get specialized help if they have identified developmental delays or specific health conditions. Least Restrictive Environment, or LRE, applies mainly to inclusion of students with disabilities in the regular classroom, but may also apply to L2 learners, that is, students who are still learning the language of instruction. Put simply, this policy requires that learners spend as much time as possible in classrooms and in other learning spaces, including play areas, together with their differently abled peers. In other words, learners with special needs should be separated as little as possible or in least restrictive ways. Assistive technologies range from high to low, both in terms of sophistication and cost. High-tech devices include, for example, touchscreen, speech recognition and simulation devices, such as the handheld device you see in the picture here, that enables children who are unable to speak communicate by touching the screen, and motorized wheelchairs. Low-tech devices are usually lower cost, but may require significant time and expertise to develop and use. For example, reading masks, pencil weights, braille reading materials, and signing systems for hearing-impaired children. Examples of assistive services are physical, occupational, and speech therapy. Module 5, Slide 10. What do regular classroom teachers need to know and be able to do? Well, first, become familiar with international, national, and state or district legal frameworks, all the way from the International Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2006, down to your school's policy on inclusive education and teacher guidelines, as well as other relevant resources. Secondly, gain the trust of families and advocacy organizations in your community. In addition, work in teams with other teachers, specialists, and parents to understand students' needs and develop individual education plans, or IEPs. And finally, create an inclusive learning environment, which, as you already know, is one where every student is equally respected, supported, and has both physical and social space to grow, to express herself, and to reach her full potential. Module 5, Slide 11. Practical tips for differentiating the learning environment and process. Begin and end each lesson with whole class meetings for activity orientation, instructions, and sharing. Set clear guidelines for students to complete tasks, report progress, and take on new ones in an orderly fashion. Designate different areas of the classroom for specific tasks. For example, quiet areas for reading, other areas for pair work and group work. Observe small group task completion and provide support as needed. Make use of wall and shelf space to display a variety of cultures, abilities, and home settings. Module 5, Slide 12. Several of the principles and tips for differentiating instruction are illustrated in these classrooms. For example, space allocated for teacher-supported group work with wheelchair access, use of technologies by students with special needs, students gathered for a whole group discussion or orientation, and differently abled students working in groups or pairs. Which of these methods and tools are already being implemented in your classroom and school? What others that are not shown here or mentioned in the previous slides are you familiar with? What do you think is possible in the near future? What resources and expertise would be required? Module 5, Slide 13. In this example from Zanzibar, a decision has been taken to use large-sized image and print materials in children's mother tongue to access basic literacy for all students, including but not only for those with visual impairment. Module 5, Slide 14. National Commitments, an example from Brazil. The National Plan of Rights of Persons with Disabilities, also known as Living Without Limit, enacted by the government of Brazil in 2011, is a legally binding policy that covers education, health care, social inclusion, and accessibility. Among its specific measures for education, the plan ensures access to classrooms and transportation to and from school for learners with disabilities. It also provides teacher training, assistive devices, and bilingual education programs. Does your country have a national plan or another form of national commitment to inclusive education? What are the main components of the plan? How successfully is the plan being implemented? Module 5, Slide 15. Examples of inclusive education strategies from around the world. These examples from preschool through secondary demonstrate how inclusive education can come to life at all levels. Even toddlers in preschool programs can be guided to help accommodate their less abled peers, and primary school resource room teachers can learn how to design and share low-cost teaching aids. In forming the library research groups at secondary level in India, teachers make a point of putting together students with diverse backgrounds and different ability levels, but with a common interest. Module 5, Slide 16. The takeaway. Inclusive education seeks to fulfill the right of all people to learn in a welcoming and enabling environment. In practice, inclusive education focuses on strategies for supporting individuals and groups who have previously been excluded from education, most often but not always because of their level of ability, appearance, race, age, place of origin, language, gender, gender identity, or socioeconomic status. Inclusive classrooms and schools are designed to provide a least restrictive learning environment to those with identified special needs. Inclusive education systems make special efforts to engage parents and communities in helping all children reach their full potential. Differentiating instruction is a key classroom strategy for effectively responding to the needs of diverse learners. Module 5, Slides 17, 18, and 19. As in previous modules, choose the best way to respond to each item. You can check your answers on Slide 19, or if you're watching the video version, look for the answers at the end of the presentation. Module 5, Slide 20. Think like a teacher. First, discuss the situation at your school. You might try some questions like these. Does your country, state, or district have a commitment to inclusive education? What is the name of the legal framework, policy, or plan? How well is it being implemented? What guidelines, resources, and support services are available to teachers at your school? Then, describe a strategy that you would like to try out to make your school or classroom more inclusive. What is the objective of the strategy, and what are the first 3 steps you would take? Module 5, Slide 21. The next and last module of the basic Learning to Get Along course addresses a growing and very serious, sometimes deadly problem in schools and communities around the world, whether they are rich or poor. Bullies make life and learning difficult, sometimes impossible for other children to learn. What is the solution? Can social and emotional learning help bring an end to the scourge of bullying over the long term? We think so, but how? Module 5, Self-Checkout. 1. In Mrs. Bandera's story, what kind of assistance does the principal offer? Professional development and ongoing support. 2. The practice calling for students with disabilities to spend as much time as possible in regular classrooms and recreational spaces is known as least restrictive environment. 3. Which of the following most accurately describes an inclusive learning community? All of the above. 4. A handheld device that enables children to communicate by touching areas of the screen is an example of high-tech assistive technology. 5. Changing mindsets to accept and respect people who are different is called normalization. 6. What type of assessment tool is often used to track student progress in differentiated classrooms? Ongoing formative assessments.